good morning, good afternoon, evening, wherever you're listening to this podcast from. My name is Jadisola Rawa, and I'm bringing you the Solar Roundtable podcast. And I'm super excited because the conversation we're going to have today is a bit different. I have a very interesting lady in the studio with me today, and I'm just going to introduce her. Let's get into it. I have Dr. Temilade Sesan, and she's a social researcher. I think it's like social development researcher is what she is. So yeah, I know, even me, I'm curious to know what that means. So Dr. Temilade, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
Awesome. So do you want, I mean, we're pretty informal around here. So do you want us to like insist on, because when people get doctorates, it's a big deal. If I was a doctor, I'd insist that you call me Dr. Jadisola. So should we go with the Dr. Temilade?
Is fine.
Wow, okay, cool. Interesting. So thank you very much for joining us, and we're very excited to talk to you today.
Happy to be.
So like on the show, you know, like the reason we have this podcast is to kind of like just break down that whole renewable energy space and energy access to like the layman on the street, and just talk in a very non-technical, very practical way, talk about the impact of the work that everybody within the space does. Yep. And honestly, like, you're the first researcher that we're having on this show. And all of the things that you do, they intrigue me, like, you know, like your gender balance and, you know, equity, you know, you're very involved in that, and the whole sustainability arm of things. So tell us a little bit about how you found yourself in this pretty niche space. Because you talk to most people on the, and I'm like, I don't know, I just started and I just found myself, you know. So did you just find yourself, or how did this start for you?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think it's a bit of both, accidental in a sense, but also quite deliberate. So I am a social development researcher. That's a bit of a mouthful. I had my PhD in sociology and social policy. Wow. That's the broad field. But I looked at the issue of energy access, in particular cooking energy access. And if there's a phrase that defines the work that I've done since then, it's social inclusion, right? So we're talking renewable energy, but we're talking about who's included and who's not. Yes, on what terms, on whose terms, who's defining progress, who's defining development, and importantly, you know, not to divorce the goal of renewable energy or whatever it is from broader development priorities. We know that we work in, people will call it global south. Some of us are not very taken by that term, but you know, in Nigeria, where you have high rates of poverty. I mean, there's many good things, but also we have to acknowledge the material poverty of people, and we are all trying to get to a more developed state where people can just live more dignified lives. So I do not ever want to take that context out of it. Like, you're talking about renewable energy, but you're not talking about renewable energy for Germany. You're talking about renewable energy for Nigeria, where there's this level of deprivation that you also have to attend to. So in many ways, even in the more so-called developed countries, many renewable energy interventions are pegged to economic incentives. You have to relate the two. You have to, you know. So beyond gender is also just the social and economic context, and letting that reflect in the energy interventions that we do.
Like, you know, as you were talking, like, one of the things that jumped out at me was the fact that you're providing solutions, right? But for who?
Yeah.
And you will think that when you sit down in a room to say, oh, we're going to provide energy access for this community, right? In your head, you're like, it's for the community. But I don't think that a lot of the times people break it down, do you know what I mean, to that level of, you know, for who? You know, the men and women in this community, who's benefiting and who isn't. So tell us a little bit more about, you know, like that nexus between energy access and gender equality and, you know, and just social inclusion, like you said. Like, what are the things that we're missing when, you know, as an organization or a development partner, you know, a funder or whatever it is, you say, oh, we're going to provide energy access. What are those things that we're not necessarily thinking about that we should?
Okay, those are many questions.
I know. That's why I said it was going to be a very interesting conversation, because I promise you, in my head, I'm thinking there's so much going on, you know, with what you do. So, yeah.
There is. And maybe I'll start with a question of my own. It's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer it because the answer is obvious, actually. It would be that for organizations broadly that do these interventions in communities, how many of us have lived in those communities before? how many of us have the lived experience of those communities? I can say for a while I did, because I had to.
I mean, you have a PhD in this thing, so yes, I can imagine.
For part of my field work,
Yeah.
rural communities in Nigeria and Kenya. And that really does give you a window into into the realities of people. So there's this notion in the social sciences of the myth of community. I think it's quite sometimes not very flattering, maybe a bit patronizing to say, oh, we're going to this community. What's the composition of the. So it's a myth that communities are like homogeneous, and there's no such thing. You do have many lines, but one of the most consequential would be the gender lines, because men and women, just because I'll try to simplify this, men and women just have different starting points, right? Different baselines in terms of access to resources. I'm sure you found that in your work, like even access to capital or collateral, for example, for accessing capital. You have many places where women can't, are not allowed to inherit. You have places where, like, for real, women are not even allowed to keep the proceeds of their enterprise. Because so for something like palm oil rather in the Southwest, you have women, the only thing that they are entitled to is the waste after the palm oil has been extracted, because the lands are owned by men. And it's women that process painstakingly and sell, but the proceeds have to go to the man, like culturally, or male relatives.
This is the point where I say, hey, God, do.
Like, these are the issues, right? And so you want to be providing energy, some kind of intervention for that kind of community. Actually, it's more likely that if you were to provide, say, a more efficient machine that used electricity, for example, the beneficiaries, unless we are very deliberate about,
will be oh my goodness,
the greatest beneficiaries would be with men, because ironically, it's so many contexts where technology has been introduced and so makes the job more efficient, faster, more profitable, and then suddenly it becomes something that the men didn't want to touch, to becoming a male dominated industry. So, like, because they see profits there and they just go there and then edge out the women.
And it's just you breaking it down, like, because again, I promise you, I've never thought along those lines. It's always like, oh, like when you do something for a community, it's benefiting the community, right? But then hearing you break it down like this, it tells you how disenfranchised women can be in these communities. Unless you're deliberate about the action. Like, I feel like I should be taking notes. I feel like I'm in class. I feel like I'm in class and I should be taking notes.
I'm not even the best person to learn from. If you really want to know these things, just go a day in the life. Like, go and spend time. Like, again, when I was doing this research for my PhD thesis, I spent weeks actually living with regular people in villages and just spent time hanging out with women, doing their cooking, like that. And you find out that just because of cultural expectations, like, she's just moving from one domestic duty to the other, to the other. So where is the time to even cultivate, the economic resources that might be available to her? So it just really opens your eyes in a way that no textbook could. In the social sciences we call it ethnography. Ethnography. I'm not saying everyone should like go gangster and go and do that, but somehow sort of simulate that experience, because we really need to understand what's going on before we can start designing interventions.
When are we moving to community? Because I'm ready at this point. Oh, wow. So what you're going to find about this conversation that we're having today with Dr. Temilade, okay, I'll call her Temilade, but let me put doctor, let's put some respect on the name, is the fact that there's so many different aspects to the work that you do. Sometimes you have conversations with people and it's pretty straight-laced, this and that and everything. And I'm looking at my questions that I have for you and I'm like, oh my God, my brain is buzzing, like there's so many places to go. But let's talk, I know you've done significant work in the whole mini-grid space, and I'm very curious to understand a bit more about that. But while we're on this topic, what is the nexus between energy access and sustainability? Because that, your work also covers, quite a bit when it comes to sustainability. And I think that's probably a problem for most African countries, right? Is the fact that, sustaining it. We've done this great work. We've done this project. We've done this. Sustainability. What's the balance? How do we find that balance?
Okay, so you mean sustainability from an ecological perspective?
From whatever perspective, actually,
Okay.
yeah, because they all work hand in hand, right? So yeah.
Right. What's the next? I think the SDGs speak would put it a bit more bluntly and call it trade-offs. Like, what are the potential trade-offs between energy access and there are quite a few of them. So we're trying to go green, right?
Tell me about it.
With energy access, is it important? Very. Where does it rank in the list of priorities for these kinds of communities we're talking about? And so it's interesting. I was just reading an article on climate change mitigation broadly by some folks at the Institute for Development Studies in Brighton in the UK. They do very good work. And they were talking about how policy makers and funders have made this mistake over time of, again, separate the illusion that you can separate energy access from the rest of development. So you don't want to be promoting green energy when it doesn't have co-benefits, right? Co-benefits beyond energy, beyond going green. Co-benefits for communities, so economic benefits, social benefits, and otherwise. That is how. So in other words, so I'll give an example. If you promote 100% smokeless stove, cook stove, is it likely to score all the carbon credits, available?
Yeah.
Likely. But what does the evidence say about the likely rate of uptake and sustained use of those cook stoves? Very, very low.
That's it. Yeah.
So there you may have gained on the sustainability angle, but how we are not providing access.
Yeah.
So the trade-off there might be find a cook stove that somehow, let's just hypothetically, 50% emissions reduction, for example. But somehow, because you have worked with communities, it's you found this technology that is culturally, socially, economically appropriate for their context. That 100% efficient cook stove costs thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
But this one that is like at the level of the sustainability, especially from an ecological perspective, you have compromised on it, but you have increased energy access for the
and uptake as well.
Uptake for now, and then we can sort of build on that in a few years,
time.
right?
Yeah. So I mean, what I get from this is that interventions have to be tailored. It's not a one-size-fits-all type scenario. And even when they're tailored, right, you take in all of the nuances, all of the, do you know what?
Yes.
It's a lot of work.
It is.
And, I think if there's anything I'm taking from this conversation that I'm taking into my work is to make sure that when we do what we do, we're having the interventions or whatever it is, we're looking at all the different angles to it. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to like we're just going to provide this or we're gonna, that kind of thing. And I think it's a conversation that everybody has to be around the table for, and this is one of the things I love about doing this show, because I promise you, prior to this conversation, I had no idea, and I'm in the space. But one of the things you talked about is policies, and that takes me to my next question is the energy policies that we have in place now. And I'm going to put you on the spot a bit. Do you think the policies as they stand? No, first, I mean, a lot of questions in one question, right? Do we even have enough policies, right, guiding the space? And then the policy as they stand, right, is that what's going to take us to the promised land? And if it isn't, maybe give us like one or two things that we probably aren't aware of, that we need to be aware of, that can take us from where we're at to hopefully at least a step further in the direction we need to be going.
Okay. So which policies are we talking about?
The energy,
there are several.
Yeah, there's a lot. But I mean, the one that underpins, maybe we can be specific to renewable energy in this instance, right? So the ones that underpin the renewable energy space as it currently operates.
So we're talking about the mini grid regulation, the clean cooking policy.
Yes.
And all of that. Maybe the first question would be who was involved in the making of those policies, how much consultation, because policies ideally should be made for people, not the other way around, not people for policies. Sometimes if policies are not realistic or not rooted in reality, it's going to have a hard time with implementation. We have no shortage of policies. I would say, in Nigeria. I think that we've come a long way. So those two policies that I mentioned, the clean cooking one and the mini-grid, I do know that there was, a significant degree of attempt, maybe more than previously, to engage a broad range of stakeholders with that. One of those, the clean cooking one, was led by an NGO, a non-profit, and that's to say, for me, that highlights the role of those kinds of actors in this space, led but in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment and all of that. So a really good model to follow there, because then they're able to bring to the table those who should be included in those consultations and deliberations. And then, so those two policies, I think, there have been reviews, especially of the mini-grid regulation. It is delivering results, but arguably those policies are up against a lot of there's a lot of headwinds. Maybe what I will say is that the policies can only take us so far on their own. What can give us extra mileage is to link up these policies with policies in other sectors, policies and action in other sectors that will enable broader rural development. So, for example, linking up the mini-grid regulation with policies in agriculture and gender and broader areas of rural development that can enable energy access to link up with productive use, but also domestic export, potentially international exports, so that people find access to markets for those. So it's not just energy for the sake of it. We have to think holistically and have joined up policies. So that's the gap that I see in the sector at the moment.
I mean, you're the doctor. How do we bridge the gap? Because, and I see this as well, in the course of my work, I see the fact that, it's almost like there's this organization isn't talking to this organization, but they work. There's a lot of synergy that, so how do we make this out? How do we make people talk to themselves? How do we bring the synergy?
I know, still talking to, about policies, talking to government now, who I believe, they do have a responsibility to be accountable to citizens. I think it's just one government. So it irks me personally when you see it even at state level, they say, something is not my ministry.
It's not my business.
It's one government. So we're talking about if it's the federal government of Nigeria with these different ministries. I think that just cultivating that idea and not working in silos, it will take a while to get there. I think that maybe realistically one thing that maybe where the funding is coming from, whether we're talking about commercial banks or DFI, the development finance institutions, those could be part of the, I do not like conditionalities, just for the record, but those could be part of the requirements for accessing funding, to say that you identify this and this and this agencies, ministries, but also stakeholders, so broadening it beyond the government now. So mandating quotas for that kind of participation might work in the first instance, and then gradually when that yields results, then it becomes a culture, something you don't have to force people to do anymore.
Some days you wake up and you're like, we're making progress, and then sometimes you have certain conversations and you're just calm. I'm very calm today. I'm very calm today because I'm just good. It lets you know how much more there is to do. Do you know what I mean? And but okay, just moving on. Let me refer to my notes for this one, because I know that I'm glad we talked about mini-grid regulations, because it brings me to my next question for you. And I know that some of the recent work that you've done, is in sustainability, inclusiveness, and governance of mini-grids in Africa. And so I kind of think that the question you just answered kind of speaks a bit to that. But what's interesting to me is that this project is something that you did across 4 African countries, if I'm not mistaken. So what was the aim? What were you hoping to achieve with that?
Yeah.
And if you did achieve it, which of the countries that you did this in would you point to as a model for a country that is, serious about this and and they're going all out to achieve? I know Nigeria was one of the countries. The patriotic part of me was to say, Nigeria's let's not lie, probably not, but so tell us a bit about that, that project and what you've seen in other spaces, and do they apply here, and what are we missing if we're not there yet?
Yeah. Okay, I'm tempted to just say read the paper.
No, but I mean, like, I've gone through it a bit, but then I mean, like, other people. So, like, the more we tell other people about it, then hopefully, then they're also encouraged to read it.
That's fine. And the blogs, the simplified blogs on it. So, yeah, that's a good question. So that project was the proposal was crafted. It was funded by the UK Research Institutes. Was crafted against the background of, there are these mini-grid interventions sprouting up all across the continent, backed by donor money, government money, things like that. And we just, again, as we do as researchers, like wanting to take stock, like, who is monitoring these things? Who's looking at what's working and what's not? So that's what we basically did. And we're not looking at it from the technical angle because we know, in many ways, especially the solar mini-grids cropping up, the basics of the technology are pretty straightforward, right? You have all those components of, there might be improvements in, say, battery and storage technology, but the basic setup, but one thing we realized is that, it looks like the level of investment in that is not yielding commensurate results. So what's going on there? If it's not the technology, so what is it? And so that's why we looked at the sustainability, inclusiveness, and governance. Looking at those, and what we found, it was purely social science research. It was a bunch of geographers, sociologists, a couple of economists, and all of that. Was that maybe I'll just pick one of the most succinct. So far, across the continent, there is no single business model for delivering mini-grids that has got it all, that has found. So I can't point to one country because there are several characteristics of the target population that would preclude, or that would seem to preclude, a successful end to that story. You have mini-grids supplying power at multiple times the cost of grid electricity everywhere across the 4 countries. And you have communities where, they are poorer and, not as productive as the rest of them. So the idea of productive use then came in, from, the ground, like let's encourage productive use. But that in itself has had limitations. Productive use. So one of the most insightful observations that we had was from a developer on the ground in Nigeria. This guy means business. He had deployed his team to do their own ground level research, and they found that, from the interview excerpt, basically like all this productive use noise has to stop because it's nonsense, in his words, because from their own research on the ground, we found out that what are you using if the agricultural productivity levels are fundamentally low with smallholder farmers, community, heavy communities, and so what needs to be is part of what I was saying about linking to other sectors. What needs to be done is to, first of all, expand the agricultural base, expand productivity that will then make it profitable for processing and for electricity to be that input. And so what he did, this developer did a few pilots on communities that he was working with, and found out that at reasonable interest rates, those farmers paid back, and they had in one planting season, and they had 4 times the harvest. Yes. So it's really about thinking through. We need to stop thinking about silos. Yes, energy access is good, but for what? To what end? And if it's not producing that end, maybe we need to step back and say, it's the layers of why okay, this is not working. Why? And maybe sometimes that will take us not to an energy answer immediately. It will be
something else that you need to there's a problem to be solved before you jump into the energy. Yeah.
So it's that kind of iteration. But again, it's useful that I was saying earlier, it's useful to have things that don't work out quite as well as we planned, because if we are then honest with ourselves, we have something to look at and then say what didn't work here, and then iterate on that basis. It's fine. I don't want to say I like failure, but when I fail in my life, I try to embrace it. After all maybe I'll do some hand wringing for a while, but I quickly snap out of that party and then say,
why did this fail?
Exactly.
What could I have done better?
Yes.
Oh my word, like I could talk to you for the rest of the day because, just gaining insight into a perspective that I haven't fully explored before is something that I find really fascinating, and just talking to you has been fantastic. And again, this is the why we do this show, is to look at this whole space and say, okay, what are all the different things that go into making the space what it is, and have those conversations on a level where everybody can understand, and I think that's what you've done today. You've taken us to school, but you've done it. You've been gentle with us. You didn't do it like a doctor. You were very gentle with us. So I think exactly. So I think it's something that anybody that's listened to this episode today can understand, what needs to happen and what else needs. So I think my final question, and as we wrap this up, is what's next for you? And when I say what's next for you, right, you're doing a lot of work in all of the areas that we've talked about. What would be that thing that would happen, say, in the next 3 years or the next 5 years that brings change to the whole renewable energy space, that will make you feel like, my work here is done or is almost done?
I don't know that our work will be done for some time to come. But I think, that's interesting. I would say maybe decentralizing things a bit more. When I say decentralizing things, usually decentralizing governance. So like the governance aspect of that sigma. There's a lot of actors. There's the government, there's the donors, but many times I think even, the academic community, we're still trying to retain control over many things because we like for things to fit into these neat boxes. There is no simple fix. Yeah. Sometimes it requires just really drilling down to, again, realities of the communities and work on, and that involves having many different centers, right, of power, of resources. Sometimes just empower communities maybe to do, to test and do that. We don't have to be the ones driving every decision, driving every, and then seeing what we can sort of learn from that. There was a potential window with the whole decentralization of this whole local government autonomy, for example. So you don't have to have the Federal Ministry of Power
involved in the needs. Exactly.
So, but I don't know. That doesn't seem to be working out that well. But so, if I saw that in the next 3 to 5 years, more autonomy right from the government side of things, showing the way on how to decentralize resources, autonomy, decisions, and then you can have, because one key blocker to interventions working at that level is a lack of local accountability. So projects don't work in Suleja.
Yeah.
The man or woman in Suleja is not going. Do they know your office in Lagos?
Yeah.
Do they know your place in Abuja? But if there's local, if at that level they know who to hold responsible, local accountability, we really need to strengthen that in every way with all types of actors, government, private sector, and civil society.
Dr. Temilade Sesan, it's been fantastic talking to you this today. And I'm just so excited
Thank you.
about the perspective that you've brought in. And I feel like this is the conversation, like as you were talking, I'm thinking we should do a panel roundtable where everybody will like sit down and, but I mean, it's not going to be just a panel conversation like the norm, it will be like everybody's taking notes and then we're all signing an agreement to say, this is my part and this is what I'm going to do. And this is information that I wasn't privy to. And now that I hear this, this is what I'm going to do to make a difference, And who knows, maybe we can do that. Who knows? But thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fascinating talking to you, and I hope that we can have this conversation. Hopefully, better.
3 to 5.
Amen. I will say amen to that for sure. Amen.
Right.
So thank you very much for catching this episode of Solar Roundtable. I've been talking to Dr. Temilade Sesan, and honestly, she's given me a lot of food for thought, and I hope you listening, if you're an actor in the space and this speaks to you and there's something that you can do to change things, I hope you take something away from this and make a little bit of change wherever it is that you have your area of influence. So till the next episode, my name is Jadisola Rawa, and this has been brought to you by All On, and toodles.
Bye. Thanks.